The moment happened so quietly, most people missed it. I was standing near the refreshment table at the Westbrook Club, a private venue I'd never heard of before tonight. My ex-husband Marcus was across the room with her, Victoria Westbrook, the woman he'd left me for 6 months ago. She clung to his arm like a prize she'd won, laughing too loudly at something someone said. Then her father, Richard Westbrook, turned to greet me. Marcus had just introduced us. "This is my ex-wife, Sophia," he'd said dismissively. I extended my hand. "Sophia Castellano. It's nice to meet you." Richard's hand froze mid-reach, his face drained of color. He stared at me, mouth slightly open, then at Marcus, then back at me. "Castellano?" he repeated, voice barely above a whisper. "Yes." The word hung in the air. Richard went completely silent, and in that silence, something shifted. Marcus noticed immediately. His confident smile faltered. Victoria looked between us, confused. And I stood there, calm as ever, waiting for what would come next. I should explain who I am before this story makes sense. My name is Sophia Castellano, and I grew up in a world most people only read about in magazines. My grandfather built Castellano Maritime from a single shipping vessel into one of the largest private logistics companies in North America. My father expanded it globally. By the time I was born, our family name appeared on buildings, in business journals, and on philanthropic donor walls across 3 continents. But I never wanted that to define me. I studied international law, built my own practice, and chose to use my skills rather than rest on my inheritance. When I married Marcus Chin 5 years ago, I took his last name professionally, a choice I made freely because I wanted to be seen for my work, not my family's wealth. I thought Marcus understood that about me. I thought he valued my independence and quiet strength. I was wrong. He saw my humility as weakness, my restraint as limitation, and he left me for someone flashier, someone who demanded attention the way I never did. The marriage unraveled slowly, then all at once, Marcus started coming home later, distracted, irritated by small things that never bothered him before. He criticized my work schedule, called me cold when I was focused, said I prioritized my career over us. But the truth was simpler. He'd met Victoria at a real estate conference and decided she was everything I wasn't: bubbly, openly affectionate, always available. She worked at her father's development company, more for appearances than necessity. She posted constantly on social media, tagging Marcus in photos before he'd even told me about her. Friends sent me screenshots, their messages cautious, worried. I didn't confront him immediately. I watched, I waited, I wanted to see if he'd be honest. He wasn't. Victoria appeared long before the marriage officially ended. At dinners Marcus claimed were work events. On weekend trips he said were for networking. By the time he asked for a divorce, their relationship was already public to everyone but me, and somehow, I was supposed to be the villain for not fighting to keep him. The day Marcus chose her, he sat me down in our living room with the calm demeanor of someone discussing dinner plans. "I've never felt more understood than I do with Victoria," he said, not meeting my eyes. No tears, no hesitation, no acknowledgement of 5 years together, just a simple declaration that someone else made him feel seen in ways I apparently never could. I remember staring at him, searching for the man I'd married. He wasn't there anymore, so that's it. I asked quietly, "That's it?" He looked almost relieved, like he'd expected a fight and was grateful not to get one. I didn't give him the satisfaction of my pain. I nodded, stood, and left the room. That night, I called my lawyer. Within a week, divorce papers were filed. Marcus got what he wanted: freedom to be with Victoria publicly, without the guilt of an ongoing marriage. And I got something too: clarity. He'd expected me to accept it quietly, to fade away gracefully so he could start his new life without complications. So that's exactly what I did. I was so quiet, he never saw what was coming. Marcus didn't waste time. Within 2 weeks of our separation becoming public, he was introducing Victoria to our former friends, attending events with her, posting photos that painted their relationship as some grand love story. I was erased from conversations, referenced only as my ex-wife in the rare moments I came up. He told people we'd grown apart, that I was married to my work, that Victoria understood him in ways I never tried to, and Victoria, she ate it up. She played the role of devoted girlfriend perfectly, commenting on his posts, surprising him at work, making sure everyone knew she'd won. At a mutual friend's birthday party I'd been invited to before the divorce, Victoria made a show of sitting in my usual seat, laughing at inside jokes I'd created with that friend group. She caught my eye across the room and smiled, not warmly, but triumphantly. She wanted me to know she'd replaced me, that she was better, more fun, more worthy. I smiled back calmly, nodded once, and left early. Let her have the performance. I was building something she couldn't see. The invitation arrived on heavy cream cardstock, embossed with gold lettering. The Westbrook family requests the pleasure of your company at a charitable gala benefiting arts education. I almost threw it away. Why would Victoria's family invite me? Then I saw the small handwritten note tucked inside. Sophia, I hope you'll attend. It would mean a lot to see you there, Richard Westbrook. Marcus's future father-in-law. Strange, I held the invitation for 3 days, debating. Attending would be walking into hostile territory. Victoria would be there, playing hostess. Marcus would be uncomfortable. I'd be the ex-wife, the woman who'd been replaced, the cautionary tale of what happens when you don't appreciate what you have. Every logical part of me said to decline. But something, instinct, maybe, or curiosity, told me I needed to be there. That this invitation wasn't random, that Richard Westbrook had included me deliberately. So I RSVP'd yes, and I chose my outfit carefully. Understated elegance, nothing flashy. I wasn't there to compete, I was there to observe, and maybe, just maybe, to remind people who I actually was. The Westbrook Club was everything I expected, old money trying hard to look like new money, all marble floors and crystal chandeliers. I arrived alone, composed, wearing a navy dress that cost more than most people's monthly rent but looked simple enough to blend in. Whispers followed me immediately. I felt eyes tracking my movement across the room. Heard fragments of conversations. That's his ex-wife. Can you believe she came? How awkward. Marcus spotted me and went pale. He'd been laughing with a group near the bar, Victoria tucked under his arm. When our eyes met, his smile died. He whispered something to Victoria, who turned sharply, her expression hardening when she saw me. I didn't approach them, didn't need to. I accepted a glass of wine from a passing server and joined a conversation about the charity's mission, answering questions about my legal work with the same calm professionalism I always carried, but I could feel it, the tension. The awareness, everyone waiting to see what would happen. Victoria watched me like I was a threat, her hand tightening possessively on Marcus's arm. Good, let her feel uncertain for once. The introductions happened during the cocktail hour, a formal rotation where Richard Westbrook personally greeted major donors and distinguished guests. I'd positioned myself near the edge of the room, not hiding but not seeking attention either, when Richard's assistant approached me, asking if I'd join the receiving line. I almost declined. But I nodded and followed. Victoria was already there, practically glowing as she introduced Marcus to her father's associates. "This is Marcus Chin, my fiancé," she said repeatedly, showing off the ring that had appeared on her finger last month. Then it was my turn. Richard extended his hand warmly. "And you are?" "Sophia Castellano," I said clearly, meeting his eyes. "Thank you for inviting me tonight." His hand froze mid-shake, his welcoming smile vanished. He stared at me, not rudely, but searchingly, like he was trying to place something. "Castellano," he repeated slowly. "Yes." The temperature in the immediate area seemed to drop. Marcus shifted uncomfortably. Victoria frowned, sensing something wrong but not understanding what. And Richard Westbrook went completely, utterly silent, still holding my hand, his expression transforming from polite host to something else entirely, recognition, maybe even concern. Richard released my hand carefully, like I was suddenly made of glass. "Castellano," he said again, this time not as a question but as a confirmation. "Your family, would that be Castellano Maritime?" I smiled gently. "My grandfather's company, yes. Though my father runs it now." The color drained further from Richard's face. Around us, conversations continued, but our small circle had gone quiet. Marcus looked confused, Victoria looked annoyed, Richard looked like he'd just stepped on a landmine he hadn't seen coming. "I see," Richard said carefully. He glanced at Marcus, then at Victoria, then back at me. I didn't realize, when Marcus mentioned his ex-wife, I didn't make the connection. "Most people don't," I said calmly. "I use my ex-husband's name professionally, or I did. I've been transitioning back to my maiden name since the divorce." Richard nodded slowly, and I could see him calculating, reassessing everything he'd been told about me, everything Marcus had probably said, that I was just a lawyer, that I'd been difficult, that Victoria was an upgrade. Now he knew better, now he knew exactly who I was. And judging by the way he excused himself abruptly, muttering something about needing to speak with someone, he knew what that meant. Marcus watched him go, brow furrowed. What was that about? I'd always known my last name carried weight in certain circles, but I'd spent so much of my adult life avoiding that weight that I sometimes forgot its power. Castellano wasn't just a name, it was a legacy. My grandfather had built relationships with every major shipping company, logistics firm, and international trade organization across 4 decades. My father had maintained and expanded those connections. Our family didn't just have money, we had infrastructure, access, influence that opened doors and closed others depending on our endorsement. Richard Westbrook ran a mid-sized commercial development company. Successful, but always striving for the next level, the kind of company that needed partnerships, needed financing, needed connections to bigger players. The kind of company that would absolutely know the Castellano name. And would absolutely want to stay in our good graces. I'd kept that part of my life separate from my marriage deliberately. I didn't want Marcus to feel overshadowed. Didn't want his success attributed to my family rather than his own work. But now, watching Richard hurry away from our conversation with barely concealed alarm, I realized my discretion had backfired. Marcus had never understood who I actually was, and Richard now understood exactly what his daughter's fiancé had thrown away. The tension spread like ripples in water. I watched Richard pull his wife aside, speaking in low, urgent tones. She glanced at me, surprise crossing her face. Then Richard approached Victoria, still deep in conversation with guests, and whispered something in her ear. Victoria's animated expression faltered. She looked at me, then at her father, confusion turning to frustration. Conversations around the room began to stall as people noticed the Westbrook family's sudden tension. Business associates who'd been warm toward Marcus moments ago became slightly more reserved. A few people approached me with renewed interest, introducing themselves, asking about my work, about my family, one older gentleman, a shipping executive I vaguely recognized from industry events, clasped my hand warmly. "Sophia Castellano. I knew your grandfather, brilliant man, your father's doing remarkable work carrying on his legacy." "Thank you," I said graciously. Marcus was watching now, really watching, his face a mask of growing confusion. Victoria's confidence was cracking, her smile too tight, her laughter too forced, and Richard Westbrook stood near the bar, phone pressed to his ear, looking like a man trying to control damage he hadn't anticipated needing to control. All because of a name, my name, the one I'd set aside to make Marcus feel secure. I stepped outside onto the venue's terrace, needing air and distance from the room's growing tension. The city lights spread below, cool evening breeze carrying away the weight of too many watching eyes. I heard footsteps behind me. Richard Westbrook emerged from the doorway. "Alone, Miss Castellano," he said carefully. "May I have a word?" "Of course." He joined me at the railing, silent for a moment before speaking. "I did some research just now to him, made a few calls. Your family's reach is extensive." "My grandfather believed in building bridges," I said simply. Richard nodded. "I had no idea Marcus was married to Edward Castellano's daughter. He never mentioned." "He didn't know how to," I said. "Or maybe he didn't want to. I kept that part of my life separate." "Why?" "Because I wanted to be valued for who I am, not what my family built." Richard was quiet. Then, "Victoria doesn't know either." I assumed not. "This changes things," he said quietly. I turned to face him. "Does it?" "I'm still the same person I was an hour ago, the same person Marcus left. The name doesn't change that." "But the context does," Richard said. "The connections, the influence." I finished. "The access to networks that could help your company." His jaw tightened. He didn't deny it. Back inside, I watched Marcus's world quietly shift. The deference people had shown him earlier, friendly respect, professional courtesy, was changing, not overtly, not dramatically, but I saw it. The slight pause before someone answered his questions, the way conversations redirected toward me when I joined a group, the business cards pressed into my hand instead of his. Marcus noticed too. I could see it in the way he stood straighter, smiled harder, tried to reclaim the room's attention. But it wasn't working. The power dynamic had silently, irreversibly changed. Victoria appeared at his side, whispering urgently. He shook his head, confused. She pulled him toward a quieter corner, and I watched them argue in hushed, tense tones. Richard rejoined his wife, their expressions serious as they spoke. Several times, they glanced toward Marcus and Victoria, then toward me. An older couple approached me, the Hendersons, major arts donors. "Sophia, your family's foundation has done wonderful work supporting music education. Would you consider joining our advisory board?" Marcus, standing 20 feet away, heard this. His face went from confused to shocked. He'd realized something, finally. That my work and my family weren't separate modest things but interconnected, significant forces he'd never bothered to understand. He'd misjudged who held real stability in our marriage, and now, in front of his future in-laws and their entire social circle, that miscalculation was becoming painfully obvious. Victoria cornered her father near the silent auction tables, her voice rising just enough that I could hear fragments from across the room. "What is going on?" she demanded. "Why is everyone acting strange?" Richard's response was too quiet to hear, but his expression was grave. Victoria's face cycled through emotions, confusion, disbelief, anger. She's just his ex-wife, Victoria insisted, loud enough now that several heads turned. She's a lawyer, she's nothing special. Richard said something sharp, his tone brooking no argument. Victoria went very still. What do you mean? Another quiet exchange. Then Victoria's eyes widened. She looked at me, really looked at me, seeing something she hadn't before. Her hand went to her throat, unconscious defensive gesture. But Marcus said. She started, then stopped. Richard shook his head, still speaking in low tones. Whatever he was telling her was reframing everything, the divorce, the relationship, the casual way they'd both dismissed me as forgettable. Marcus joined them, trying to understand. Victoria turned on him immediately. Did you know? Know what? Marcus asked, bewildered. Who she actually is. Victoria gestured toward me. Her family. Marcus blinked. I know she's a Castellano. That's her maiden name. And that meant nothing to you. Victoria's voice had a sharp edge of panic now. Marcus looked between Victoria and Richard, lost. Should it have? I'd gone to the restroom to escape the attention when I heard the door open behind me. Victoria stood there, her polished composure cracking. You did this on purpose, she said. I turned from the mirror. Did what? Came here, used your name, made everyone. I was invited, I said calmly. And I used my legal name, the one I was born with. You wanted to humiliate us. No, Victoria, I wanted to attend a charity event. You're the one who decided to see my existence as an attack. She stepped closer. Marcus told me about you, said you were cold, distant, that you cared more about work than him. And you believed that without question. Why wouldn't I? I smiled sadly, because it's easier to believe the ex-wife is the villain than to question what kind of man leaves someone without even trying to understand who they are. Victoria's eyes narrowed. What does that mean? It means Marcus never asked about my family, never wanted to know why I worked so hard or what I came from. He just assumed I was less connected, less important, less. He loved you, Victoria said. But there was doubt in her voice now. He loved who he thought I was, the convenient, quiet wife who made him feel successful without challenging him. But he never asked who I actually was, and neither did you. The evening ended quietly, no dramatic confrontation, no shouting, just a subtle, undeniable shift in how people treated me versus how they treated Marcus and Victoria. People sought me out to exchange contact information, to mention mutual connections, to suggest coffee meetings and board introductions. When I said goodbye to Richard Westbrook, he shook my hand with something like respect and regret. I hope there are no hard feelings about this evening, he said carefully. None at all, I replied honestly. Thank you for inviting me. Marcus stood nearby, watching but not approaching. Victoria had disappeared minutes earlier, claiming a headache. As I walked to my car, I felt lighter than I had in months. Not because of validation or vindication, but because I'd stopped hiding. I'd spoken my real name, stood in my true identity, and let people see me without the protective camouflage I'd worn throughout my marriage. The silence that had followed my introduction wasn't about power. It was about truth. About reality asserting itself after months of false narratives. And sometimes, silence says more than any argument ever could. I drove home with my windows down, city air rushing through the car, feeling like I'd finally stepped back into my own skin after years of trying to make myself smaller. Marcus called 2 days later. I almost didn't answer. But curiosity won. Sophia, his voice was different, uncertain. Marcus, I need to talk to you about something. About what? Silence stretched. Then, why didn't you tell me? Tell you what? About your family, about who they are, what they do. I leaned back in my office chair, looking out at the harbor where my grandfather's ship still docked. I did tell you. You met my parents, you knew my maiden name, you just never asked questions, but you never explained. I shouldn't have needed to explain, Marcus. You were my husband. If you'd cared to know me, really know me, you would have asked. You would have been curious about my background, my family, why I worked as hard as I did despite not needing to financially. I thought. He started, then stopped. You thought what? I thought you were just stubborn. Pride about making your own way. I was making my own way. But that didn't mean I came from nothing. Another long silence, then, quietly, what else don't I know? Everything that matters, I said. And I meant it. He'd shared a bed with me for 5 years and never once asked about my dreams, my history, the weight I carried. He'd made assumptions and lived comfortably in them. Victoria's world was destabilizing, and I heard about it through the whispered networks of our overlapping social circles. Her father had become distant, questioning. Her mother had made pointed comments about knowing who you're marrying. Friends who'd supported the relationship enthusiastically were now hedging, offering carefully worded observations about Marcus's complicated past. The engagement hadn't been called off, but it had been quietly postponed. To give us time, Victoria told people. But everyone knew what it really meant. Her family was reconsidering. The story they'd accepted, that Marcus had left an unremarkable marriage for true love, had been revealed as incomplete at best, deliberately misleading at worst. Richard Westbrook had done exactly what any smart businessman would do, deeper research. About me, about my family's connections, about opportunities that might have existed during my marriage to Marcus and definitely wouldn't exist now, about what his daughter's fiancé had actually walked away from. Love built on betrayal, I'd learned, had no foundation. It crumbled the moment anyone examined it too closely. Victoria was learning that now, and Marcus was learning that the quiet, cold wife he'd left behind had never been the liability he'd framed her as. She'd been the asset he was too blind to recognize. I moved forward with remarkable clarity, filed paperwork to reclaim my maiden name in all professional contexts. Accepted a position on 2 nonprofit boards my family foundation supported, started attending industry events without Marcus's shadow, without trying to minimize who I was to make someone else comfortable. My father called one evening. I heard you caused quite a stir at the Westbrook event. I smiled. Word travels fast. It does in our circles, Richard called me. Did he? Wanted to discuss a potential partnership. I told him we'd consider it. Pending due diligence. That's fair. He also apologized, said he hadn't realized his daughter was involved with your ex-husband, said if he'd known who you were. It wouldn't have mattered, I interrupted. Marcus made his choice. I'm not interested in revenge or complications. My father was quiet. Then, you're more gracious than I would be. I'm free, Dad, that's worth more than revenge. And I meant it. Losing Marcus, losing the version of myself I'd tried to be for him, had actually given me back something more valuable, permission to exist fully, without apology, without making myself smaller. Victoria and Marcus could figure out their future. Richard could navigate his business concerns. I was done being defined by who'd left me. I was moving forward as myself, finally. 3 months later, I received an invitation to another event, this one from a business journal, honoring emerging leaders in maritime logistics. My father was being recognized for lifetime achievement. I was being recognized for legal innovations in international trade. The ceremony was elegant, professional. I wore my name proudly. Sofia Castellano, printed in the program, announced when I accepted my award. In the audience, I spotted a few familiar faces from that night at the Westbrook Club. They approached after, congratulating me, asking about my work. No one mentioned Marcus, no one needed to. Later, my father caught my arm. "You know what your grandfather used to say?" "What?" "That truth is patient. It doesn't need to fight or prove itself, it just waits. Eventually, everything surfaces." I smiled, thinking about that moment when Richard Westbrook heard my name and went silent, when reality shifted the room without me having to say a word. Marcus had chosen what was loud and temporary: validation, excitement, someone who made him feel important, and he'd lost what was steady, rooted, and real, not my money, not my connections, but me. The person I actually was beneath the quiet exterior he'd never bothered to look past. I'd learned something valuable through it all. Being underestimated is painful, but it's also clarifying. The people who truly see you will recognize your worth without announcement. And the ones who don't, they were never yours to begin with. I walked out of that ceremony with my father, into a life built on truth rather than performance, and I'd never felt more myself. The silence that had changed everything wasn't about power, it was about the inevitable moment when reality demands to be acknowledged, and sometimes, that moment arrives in the quietest way possible, with a name, a recognition, and the sudden understanding that someone let go of something they never truly understood. Marcus learned that too late, but I learned it just in time.